we'll start the meetup. So, good evening, everybody. I welcome you to Android Developer Meetup. My name is Peter, and I'm Android lead here in STRV. And today we prepared for you two technical talks. First one will be about accessibility, practical tips. It's gonna be presented by Michael. And the other talk is gonna be about Dagger, and it's gonna be presented by our special guest Tom from Google. So enjoy the evening, and we can start with the first talk.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Michal Urbanek. I'm the Android engineer at STRV for almost 5 years. And today I would like to talk about the accessibility, mostly on Android, but you can apply this for, let's say, everything. All right. Before we start, how many of you actually think about the accessibility while working on a project? Is there anyone considering? Very 2-3 people. Well, better you. You're not coding, right? Well, hopefully there will be more people in the end with raised hand. We'll see about it. I don't want to talk about the accessibility, about the interaction that much. I will just mention that the accessibility is important actually. There is a lot of people out there that have some kind of impairment, cognitive impairment or visually impairment, which actually, people can hardly see that what's on the screen. That's why actually important. But that's those people that are your users of the application doesn't necessarily has to have some kind of disability, but simply accessibility can be even about improving the UX, the experience while using the application. That's why actually it could be beneficial for everyone, not just disabled people. So while you are working in accessibility, it's not simply all or nothing. It's not pass or fail. You can partially it, you can partially pass all those tests, all those improvements you're trying to do. Trust me, everything you trust to do to improve the user accessibility and experiments can help you with can help your users to use your application. I'll have a lot of things to show you right now, and I will everything what I show you I'll code or I prepare some simple, real simple application. So I don't have any slides for you. Everything will be directly in the emulator shown, or in the I will try to show you how to fix some issues and reflect it directly in the application. So we'll start with the first issue, which is, well, actually I should start with tools. So if you start trying to improve your accessibility in the application, there are two main tools that actually helps you with that. First tool is the accessibility scanner, which is actually scanner that can actually scan your screen or do some recording of screens, and then tells you immediately what's wrong with the screen, with the widgets you are using. As you can see, there is a lot of issues. So this is one really powerful tool. You don't have to have any interesting in accessibility, and still the tool tells you everything, and also it tells you what's wrong and how to fix it, which is very cool. And the second tool, sorry. And the second tool is actually Toolbar. The Toolbar is classic screen reader. Yeah, it will just allow you.
Talk back on.
Yep. It will just help to users that cannot read, cannot see. It will help to navigate through the
Apply
screen.
button A11Y. Double tap to activate.
Yeah, it will just
Off. Talk back off.
read for the users what is on the screen, what you can do, and those interactions. And yeah, using the tool, the Toolbar can be slightly difficult, especially for people who are experienced with that. But you don't need that much of experience. There are some really simple gestures for navigating through the screen and accessing all those widgets. So yeah, we'll get to that as we go through all those issues. All right, I will start with the first issue, which is pretty straightforward, and this is color contrast. As you can see, my designer, or me, create this application and build this with some brand colors. I can show you, this is shortcut for the accessibility scanner. I can, by just clicking snapshots, do snapshots of the screen, and the accessibility scanner tells you how many issues you have there. So you can see that there are two issues with the body error and the microtext, and both are actually contrast color issues. You can see if I expand the issue, it tells you that the content contrast ratio is 3.5 to 1, which is not the minimum required for the accessibility to pass. There are different levels. I'll show you how to fix it quickly if you don't have designer as me. So you can see that I can tell you that this micro color is actually this text light color. You can see I can open some color contrast checker till it's slightly white. I can put the foreground color, which is the text color here, and the background color is white. You can see that the ratio is actually almost 3.1 to 1, and this is not compliant. This WCAG, this some guideline which actually tells you how the application should look like to be accessible. It's not only for the Android, you can apply it for anything. If you are app developer, if you are web developer, if you are even designer, you should actually read it. There is a lot of guidelines mentioned here, and that's basically all the guidelines and everything that you need to know about the accessibility. There is a lot, and in 2.5 there was a lot of more mentioned about mobile. So if you are Android or iOS developer, there is a lot of you can read from those, which you should actually meet to be fully accessible. Well, what can I do here? We are aiming at least on the AA. The AA level of the accessibility means that I have to have the contrast at least 4.5. I can use the lightness slider here to increase the contrast ratio. As I move it to darker color, you will see that yeah, right here. 4.5 is the minimum to complete the AA compliant and then you can grab this color and simply replace it in your color and use it. If I do so, if you don't trust me, I can show you that if I do the scanning again, the application where the scanner, the micro, which was previously wrong, is now accessible. It's fine. It's compliant to be accessible. I can just quickly show you what means the AAA. The AA is, well, the AAA was added later, but the AA is minimum what you have to aim for. And you can, if I try to move the lightness slider to the darker color, you will see that to pass the AAA, you actually aim for 7, yes, for 7.0 to 1 to match the contrast. But it can be really hard if you imagine your lovely designer, he won't agree with that because that's something he won't do because you have some branding colors and so on. So yeah, at least the AA, I can say it's fine. So that was the first issue, which is color contrast. Yeah. Another thing which also can help you with the Android scanner is the lovely content description. Everyone knows it because if you omit it for some reason, the description of some image, let's say, or image button under it automatically tells you that there is something wrong and gives you warning. This is pretty straightforward. So every image basically should have content description. That's pretty straightforward. You can, well, I'll show you. Well, for images, it's really, as I said, really straightforward. For example, this one.
Talk back on. Not checked. Show password button A11Y.
Yep. It tells you
Tap
that
to toggle. Off.
it tells you that this button is actually a toggle password. So you have to either use proper widget or add manually the content description for the screen users to be able to understand what the button actually means. You can omit it. You can always set the important for accessibility no, but use it only if you are sure that the image or the icon is only infographic. So it's not actually actionable item. You cannot click it. Then it's completely fine to set this to important no if you want to get away with the warning. But what could be even slightly more trickier is, for example, I can show there is some toolbar that we are using, and there is the icon filter. I set the icon to the filter, but also it's very important to also set the description, because if you don't set the description, the user which actually use the toolbar won't know anything about what is actually doing, what the button will does if you click it. So especially this is really important to think about if you set something. And there is the second, actually for me, even, well, not more interesting, but yeah, but it may be interesting. I'll show you. I have a simple recycler view with list of items. What can I show? What I want you to show you is how to set the dynamic content, the content description dynamically. This could be really important. As you can see, I have just simple list. Where is the username? I would say there is some text which I don't know, for some reason left there, and there is a button which actually should send you the profile to user detail. I can show you what actually the
Talk back on.
user who's using the toolbar who's actually can hear.
Open user detail button
That's
1 of
it.
5 in list. 5
Open user
items.
detail, and this button is actually on the screen
Double
5
tap to
times. So if
activate.
you imagine a user who's going through using the screen reader and going through all the screen,
Open user detail
He
button
just-
2 of 5.
sorry, I
Off.
was just
Talk back off.
he will just repeatedly hear the same open user detail without any context. That's why actually the dynamic context can be useful, and I'll show you directly in the code what I mean. Here is something that I would like to see as or heard if I will be using the toolbar. This is simply user adapter which actually binds the item, and under this actually button, which is the button that opens the user detail, actually you can set dynamically the content description to something really more like more informative, with some string with more context. I can show you what I used. I used the open, the property as for the username, and then user detail. And I'll show you immediately what the result is if you change it like this. I simply added more context to the
Talk
button,
back on.
which makes suddenly way more sense to user.
Open Benai Smart User Detail button 1 of
That's it.
5 in list. Open Murphy Milner User Detail
It
button
tells you
2 of 5.
what
Double tap
details
tap.
actually will be
Talk back
opened
off.
if you click on the button. That's something you can consider even in the list items, or you can have plenty same buttons on one screen, and then this could be very beneficial for you, and especially for your users, of course. All right, that was the content description. Another issue which can be also recognized and immediately fixed by scanner is touch area. Every actionable item, the widget, we are calling widgets, should be at least 48 dp wide and high to be able for everyone to click it. I prepare one button according to design, where actually the scanner tells you that the touch target is just 32 dp instead of minimum 48 dp. Well, you can say that this is exactly what the design looks like, right? So there's nothing wrong. But the button should be done actually in a different way. I can show you how the button styles is done actually. And this is how I did the button. I'll display here. This small button is actually this secondary small button style. And I set the height directly, or well, I just set it to 32, which was wrong from me. Instead, what I should do, I should have let the minimum height and width basically be 48 and set either padding or insets. For material buttons, I'm using inset. I can show you this button is using actually this 48 minimum width and height. So just setting those inset, your designer will be happy because suddenly the button is still 42 dp high, but at the same time, you can see that the button looks completely same. But if I try to do the snapshot, well, the button is suddenly fine. Just because I inserted the insets for the button, well, what it does is actually it is 32 dp, but I can, if I try to click slightly outside, which is the 8 dp, it will also activate the button. That's the whole magic I have done. But trust me, well, yeah, that was about the touch target of size of the actionable items, which is one of the, well, I would say, the most critical topics. Another issue in the toolbar, not the toolbar, in the accessibility is the keyboard navigation. This is something that you have to do on your own. There is no tool that will help you with that. And this is simply you can either use simulator or use your phone and plug in your Bluetooth keyboard and try to navigate through your whole application just by using keyboard arrows, and then either enter or spacebar. So as I try to navigate through the screen, you can see that there is, okay, it is visible. Not much. Well, trust me, it is visible way more on my screen. Because there are two main issues with the keyboard navigation. One of those is that every widget should be every actionable widget should be navigatable by the keyboard. This is really important because imagine that you are using some widget with a focusable field and it should be clickable. It won't be navigable by the keyboard. And that's one issue. And the second one, which is actually unfortunately not visible, every item should be, like the focus, if you navigate the item, should be visible. Okay, it's slightly visible, way better on my screen, trust me. So yeah, that's basically it. You can go ahead, try to navigate through your application. I guarantee if you are using some I would say non-friendly widgets, you may get some headache to try to improve that or fix that. I will quickly show you if I this is custom toolbar on the top. This is custom view basically, which replaced the standard toolbar. And what I wanted to show you that probably almost everyone is in the toolbar. And if I try to navigate up, and right now I'm clicking up and down arrows, and you have no chance to navigate the X button on the toolbar. This is something I have no idea why it's done, why it's not fixed, why it's not even fixed in the material toolbar widget. But trust me, if you are using toolbar, there is no way that the user can use the even the home button or back button or even menu items which can be on the right. That's something I have no idea why it's done, but well, if you go through the Google applications, you will see that they are not using the toolbar, so maybe that's they don't want to bother with that and use the custom view. That was the rule. Well, otherwise, yeah, you can try to go through your application just using the keyboards, and you will see how far you can go, and if everything is accessible. All right, that was the keyboard navigation and navigation focus. Right now, I have something, I have a lot of, next, I would say, accessibility issues, and those can be recognized by the lovely toolbar. Well, the toolbar can be tricky to use, but you will get used to it. Well, the first one is everything is mostly about the state announcement, because if you can imagine, if you just close your eyes and try to navigate your application, and as long as you don't hear anything, any feedback, what's actually happening on the screen, you have no idea what's happening on the screen because you cannot see it. That's why actually the toolbar is a really powerful tool, because it can helps you to identify your issues. It doesn't let you know, well, it won't tell you what's wrong actually. You have to just try to think about, well, you can just close your eyes and you will see on your own. And we will try something like that. So first of all, is something I took from the Google Play library, and this is, I just prepared it with a fragment. That's it. There is something I grabbed from
Talk
Google
back
Play.
on.
If you try to open any application detail on Google Play and open it,
Murphy Milne.
done. I just opened the screen and nothing's happened actually. And what Google does, I can show right away. I call it screen announce, screen entering announce. And
Pixel launcher.
and that's it.
A11 wide.
if you
Heading
open the
out of
screen,
list.
actually, I announce there is on any view, you can actually call the announce for accessibility, and any string, anything you want, you can actually announce. And that's actually a really powerful tool, the announce about accessibility, which can help you fix like almost every issue. So I can show you, I just compile the project, and if I go back and
Murphy
try to
Milner.
open the user
Profile
detail,
2 of 5 in list. User detail.
that's it. At least the user detail was there. Of course, I could be more creative, like user add some dynamic description, like open XYZ user detail. You can see that if you close your eyes and open some screen and nothing's actually happened, you have no idea what happened. So that can be really useful. That was the screen entering announce, and another thing is actually our
Settings.
loading
Selected.
progress.
Apply.
Loading.
Button out of list.
I can show you if
Double
I
tap to activate.
talk too much. If I try, I prepare something under the apply button. You can image some. You can image something. Some server work is happening, and you are waiting for the response. I can show you what happened if I click on the apply button. Yes, nothing. And after it loads, after 5 seconds, still nothing. And this is, I would say, like, this should be the progress or any state announcement. I have prepared here. It's as simple as uncomment these 2 lines. I'll compile it and tell you what it does. Well, as you can see, it simply announces
one wide.
that something is
Heading.
happening, the progress is loading, and then there is the second announce after 5 seconds that something's also again happens. If I go back,
Settings.
suddenly
Apply.
it should do way more sense to anyone.
Loading more records.
And after 5 seconds,
More records loaded.
that's it. And that should be done actually if you are using paging adapter, infinity scrollable recycler view, or simply any, we call it stateful layout. If you are using, some progress bar until you load something, you should actually announce to the user that something is happening and something's happened. So yeah, that's the progress state. Another issue would be to announce every error state. So I have here a button which actually 50-50 shows you either value or error. That is really important not just to set error, but also announce.
Talk back on.
So if I start it
Button.
again,
Date of birth. A11. Some value.
if I set some value, I did it programmatically, it's not that big magic. I also announce what happened. I also announced that some value was actually set somewhere, and if the
Error here.
And if error happens, you should also announce error. The same would goes if you are doing something like
button, date of birth, talk back
if you do something like I did like custom button with custom error, which is completely fine for designers, it's lovely and they love it. But you have to take care that you are actually doing everything since this is custom view. But if you are using standard views, like for example, this is text input field. If I turn on the talkback,
talk back on, login, editing, on, edit box. Log, this is home fragment. Log, editing, on, edit box, email address. Editing, on, edit box, email address. Log, editing, password, 3 characters, edit box, password. Your password must be, editing, password, editing, password, 3 characters, edit box, password. Double tap and hold to long press. Editing options available. Use tap with 3 fingers to view.
And suddenly I have no idea why it's not announcing my error. Well, I have no idea.
Back button.
Maybe I changed something in code which I don't remember. Well, trust me, if you are using those text field, material text input layout and material text input layout and text input field, it should automatically be spoken. For some reason it's not. I have no idea. Maybe I changed something. So sorry about that. But trust me, if you are using widgets that are not custom but they're made by Google material, especially, there is the accessibility very improved and all the work is done for you in most cases. So that was the error announcing, and the last actually which I have prepared here is select option. There is simply a button there which I call select option. You can imagine like a, I don't know, filter selecting or calendar picker or anything. If I turn on the talkback,
Select option
one. If I double click it, nothing happens.
A11Y. Editing, password, 3
nothing
characters,
happens except
edit
the
box,
field has
password.
the focus.
Double tap and hold to long.
Yeah,
Select.
sure. The main point was that if I select anything on the screen, it actually should also announce what's happening.
A11.
So if I select this, like nothing happened. That's why actually there is again announce for accessibility, which simply before I close or dismiss the dialog, it actually tells you what was selected.
Heading. Option 1 selected.
That's it.
A11Y.
That's really nothing important, but not important. It's not a big deal. So adding just one announce, and it will do a lot of for your users who's actually using the talkback, because you know right now you know what's actually happening on the screen and what you've done. So that was about the announcing using the talkback to listen what's happening on the screen, all those states. There could be more, like I haven't prepared everything, but there are more like cases. Let's say you update something, let's say you create a new user, let's say you delete the user. Well, you just simply dismiss or close the screen, but it shouldn't be enough, right? You should let user that some actions happen. You probably return to some screen, some previous screen, always like announce to the user that actually, let's say, user was deleted. As simple as that, but trust me, a lot of users would appreciate. So that was about the announcing. Another thing is I can show you what I called like grouping views together. I can show, I prepared, well, I would say ugly, but still it is working for our demo purposes. There is text to view start date, which is just a text to view, and there is the value with the actual start date. If I if I use the talkback and try to, there are
profile photo.
As I mentioned at the very beginning, there is a lot of actually gestures. If I swipe from right to left or left to right, I go either to the next widget or previous widget. So if I start to navigate from this widget bottom, I will go to the start date.
Location. Button. Location.
Yeah.
Profile. Joyham. Edit profile photo. Start date.
Now, I went to the start date, which says there's just a start date, and
The
then
10th of October 2021.
yeah, by another swiping, it actually read the value, which could be fine on this screen, but imagine that on the right side you will have, let's say, end date. Suddenly it will read like the start date, then end date, then start date value, then end date value. What you can do is you can use any view group. As I did like linear layout, and here is all the magic that is done. If I set the view group to focusable to true, and I compile it.
Event. Android Meetup PRG. Off. Stop back off.
Now if I try to navigate to the start date, it actually reads both text views together with the text and with the value.
Stop back on. Start date, the 10th of October 2021, A11Y.
That's it. That's simple as this, and yeah, for a user, always it also makes way more sense if you group those views together. I prepare another example right here. Let's imagine you have settings. Probably everyone has settings in the application, and there is the simple profile or user information. Again, as a profile information.
Profile photo.
You can either do something like this, where actually everything is set separately, or you can group it together using the same trick just with focusable. And if I swipe to the next line,
profile photo, Joyce Hampton, joyhampton@mail.com.
it actually reads everything together, what's important in the one line, and gives you, I would say, like complete information about the cell itself. So that was the grouping views together. And now, yeah, I mentioned on the very beginning that there is a lot of gestures while you are using the talkback. One of those is you can divide the screen by actionable items, by titles, which should be headings, and you can by simple gesture, which I don't remember right now.
Talk back on. Speech
Yes.
rate.
Up and down,
Swipe down to
or
adjust the
down
setting.
and up, and it will.
Speech rate. Speech rate. Speech rate. Speech rate. Speech rate.
Well, yeah, as I said, I don't.
Speech rate. Speech rate.
Yeah,
Swipe
I
up or
don't
swipe
remember
down to adjust the setting.
newer Android how the gesture is done actually. Sorry about that, but yeah. For some reason I installed Android 12 just to try it, and yeah, they changed it. Trust me, previously it was just left and right, and it can navigate through your screen by using headings, by using characters, letters, paragraphs, just the buttons, and that way your users who's using the toolbar can actually navigate through your screen very quickly. Imagine especially longer screens. Well, one of the most cases could be some setting screen where we have information about the user, then some settings, then I don't know, about sections, and those sections actually should be marked as headings. And if I prepare title right here, and it's really as easy as set some property to your view, like text view or anything, which says accessibility heading and set it true. It's really as simple as that. I do recommend if you are using custom toolbar here, and trust me, if I go to my view, which is actually displaying the toolbar, there should be actually accessibility heading to true. Then it's always like trust me, I don't have any cognitive or visual impairment, but I was told by the company who's doing the review, the accessibility review to me, that if somebody is using the talkback, they usually use it, because that's where you can easily navigate through the screen and automatically gives you clue what's on the screen, just by like categorize basically. So this is really simple for you. There is not much work to be done. just setting this accessibility heading to 2. That's it. All right, and I believe that was about the toolbar and all those things, all those tools we were using. And right now I have a couple of, I would say, best practices that I gained during my work on 2 projects actually, which should be, one of those is accessible friendly, and second one has actually had to have the accessibility certificate. That's from those 2 things. I actually had some best practices. First one is quite easy, and this is use the material widget. Try to use the material theme and material widgets whenever possible. Trust me, one of the change they made to this material widget is accessibility improvements. They trying to improve it a lot, and it helps you and does kind of all the magic by itself. It's really as simple as that. Well, sometimes it wouldn't work. Like for example, this standard toolbar, not even material toolbar would help you with the keyboard navigation. But other than that, trust me, it can be easier. All right. Then I have another proposed or suggestion: use the proper widget for the proper work, which means that I prepare actually 2 tabs. This looks the same. Well, basically I use those instead of tabs, and this is material toggle group button, which with 2 material buttons, they looks like a tabs. There is check state, kind of nice, but there is the standard tab layout, which is slightly harder to design and to modify, but I can show you the result if I'm using the material toggle group for mimicking or replacing the tabs.
Not checked. Save checkbox 1 of 2 in list 2 items.
You put material buttons
line.
inside the material toggle
Double tap
group.
to toggle.
Those material buttons are automatically converted to checkbox because they are checkable. And well, this is not checkbox. Actually there is not much to say about those 2, because it doesn't say like anything what it does and what it should do and what the purpose is. Instead, if you are using the tab layout, which is the widget that should be actually used for this work, I can show you what it actually reads.
Private tab 2 of 2 in list 2 items.
Yeah, it will tell you that those are actually tabs, that there are 2 tabs, and the second tab is not checked, it's not selected. Easy as that, just using proper widget for proper work. Trust me, you can benefit from this, even though your designer might not agree with everything. Depends how far you want to go with the accessibility. I mentioned at least twice already. Forget about toolbar. The toolbar widget is banned for us. Use custom view, which actually can fully replace the toolbar. Because if you ever try to use the toolbar, the standard toolbar, navigable by the keyboard, it gives you a headache and you cannot fix it. You can fix it just partially. I did it just because I had to. I had no other choice. But the solution is very ugly. Well, I won't go into detail. Last thing, which also is not discoverable but by any tool, is this button actually. This button is disabled by default. There is some validation happening on the background. The validation waits for the inputs for email address and password. Please don't do that. Please don't disable any button in your application, because simply I already faced those issues by our users. You try to click it, nothing works. This is login screen, could be pretty easy and straightforward. You just need to put some email address, right? So just try to put email address, and then I try to hit the up button again. But what we had, let's imagine that user writes this email address as a login button. And trust me, not everyone knows what mistakes inside the email address. And the button is disabled, so he automatically try to contact you or contact your support because he cannot log in, right? Because the button is disabled. But the issue is with the email address, because the email address is not valid and there is the extra dot in the address, and that's why the email address is not valid and the login button is disabled. So rather than that, you always enable the button, and after clicking on the login button, display the proper error. I can just, well, I have it in code, but I don't have to show it. This is actually how it should look like from the very beginning. Instead of disabling button, always state that what's wrong on the screen. What's wrong on the screen with the enable button. So simply you will move the logic not before the button to disabling, but after the button, after clicking on the button to display proper error. That's it. Very simple as that. Just delete your disable state. You don't really need that. And then I have some random tips, which actually one of my colleagues told me that there are some improvements. I'll show you with the Toolbar, using
Talk
Toolbar.
back on.
There is a kind of nice my world string, which actually, because it's nicer, it's written together. But it does, if you try to read it,
MyVo, tab 2 of 3,
it
in
all-
list, 3 items, A11Y.
it says my world or my wood, I don't know, my something. But there is simple hack. Using this character, using this SCI character in the strings, this is actually called 0 with space. This is trick for displaying the string
Pixel launcher, home, out of
together,
list,
but at the
home
same
screen 1
time,
of 2.
the Toolbar actually will read the
Heading,
0 with
actions
space.
available, use tab with My Vault, tab 2 of 3, in list,
It just makes the
My
space
Vault,
after
tab
mice,
2 of 3.
my, and
Double
try
tap to
and nicely
activate.
redo my word. As simple as that. There is one random trick or tip. And then the second one is actually if you are building some custom views, as I did a lot because I love them. It's way easier to
Back off.
to bend the custom view. It's really easy to, if you are working with the accessibility, you are thinking about the keyboard navigation, about the different states. That's why actually the custom views are easier. And I can show you in the bottom. I can show you one simple trick. If you write your custom view, you can see that I have A11 input button, which actually this is button. This is this one button. I just mimic it. It looks as exactly as any other button in the application, but at the same time it's custom view and it's frame layout. But the thing is, if I
Talk back on. Button, date of birth, off, talk back
Yep.
off.
if I try to use the Toolbar,
Talk back on.
even though this is frame layout and I click on the button, well, it's fake button, but the button, it tells you
Button,
Button.
date of birth, some value, A11Y. Double tap to activate.
Yeah.
Some value. Off,
And
talk back
the
on.
difference is that from the frame layout, I override the accessibility delegate, and by setting info class name to button, it's actually spoken as a button, even though it's frame layout. That's simple trick I use for everything, like every view. You can mimic that the custom view is actually switch, checkbox, or anything you like, just by overriding this one method. That's very simple. It's really handy because suddenly users know what they are actually clicking on. What else can I show you? Well, I can show you this live regions. Here is a slider, and for the slider, I have this text view. which actually shows minimum and maximum value. If here I will navigate in the XML file just for you to see that there are the text view with some linear layout and there is ranger slider. I can tell you that if I'll well just write the text view where I actually set the value, it doesn't work nicely with the toolbar, because if I do it, the toolbar or if you try to read the 19 years, it doesn't tell you anything.
Talk back on. Minimum 19 years, A11Y.
Yep, it tells you the minimum Y, Z
Talk back.
years, just because
Talk back off.
this magic label for. And if you set the label for property for the year range, which is actually the slider, it automatically tells you that this text view is actually labeled for the slider. This can help you, well, your users mainly, to help you to, if they are navigating through the screen, they automatically know what those text views are for. This can be used even for different widgets, not just a slider, but a slider is the best showcase, I would say. All right, there is not much. I can tell you just. I will just tell you what's more important or what's next important, which I haven't I haven't prepared, because this would be like for different meeting or meetup. Yeah, I don't even know why the orientation is locked for the meetup. But the screen orientation is very important actually. The screen orientation, I haven't, show it here because this is kind of different topic. It's accessibility from the accessibility point of view. It's really important for the application to be able to work in both landscape and portrait. I do believe most of us from the very beginning we disabled the landscape just because the life for us is way easier. But it shouldn't be done this way. In WCAG guidelines, it's also written there, and I can guarantee you that I work for the accessibility in the accessibility application, and I can tell you that if there are some limitation disabilities for people, they are using both things. They are using tablets and they are using the tablets in the landscape. That's why the landscape is actually really important. Not just the landscape mode everything is bigger in the landscape, but for them, if the device is mode on everything, anything, this is important for them. We had a little no, I wouldn't say complaints, because we already had the landscape, we prepared the landscape from the very beginning. So we had a lot of good vibes, I would say, from our users that we actually supporting the landscape, and the life is way easier for them. And trust me, yeah, this is really important. And the last thing actually I wanted to, this is really the last thing, as I show you, for example, here on the login screen or in the settings screen, there are some errors that are shown on the screen. Most of us may be using text views or snack bars for displaying error states, but trust me, again from WCAG guidelines, based on one of those guys, is said that the error should stay on the screen for long enough to read by every user, which basically means that the error has to stay there forever until there is some action happen from the user side. So either use the non-auto dismissible snack bar, or definitely not text view because they are dismissible, or ask your designer or rating if there will be more fields. You can use some error text field, or as I did here in the settings, for example. In settings, there is a date of birth, which actually shows there's a 50-50. Yep. There is the error which actually persists on the screen for the whole time. and it's there. It stays there until there is some action from the user, and this is just because the guidelines tell us to do so. Because otherwise, the error would be dismissed, and you have no idea what's happening. So yeah, I believe that's it. Hopefully, I motivated more people for doing this great job on your applications and improve the accessibility. Thank you. And of course, we have some questions. No? Yes.
The accessibility.
Mhm.
I have a question regarding the accessibility scanner. Where can I find it? Is it an application or what
Yes.
is it?
Both callback and accessibility scanner are made by Google. They are present in the Google Play library.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then you can go easily to your settings in your phone if it doesn't crash. Yep. There is the accessibility, and if you install both applications, you will have them here. I also, in the Android 11 and 12, you can use the shortcuts, which are here present just for me, for the... Yep. Anyone else?
Yeah. Do you have any experience with Compose? Like, if it does bring any new challenges or improvements?
Well, actually, those compose components act as the same as the widgets. Except one issue, for me, like big issue, they are not navigatable by keyboard at all. You are not, for some reason, I have no idea why. No, I have no idea. Maybe we just forget some flags, or I know. To be honest, I didn't dig that more into the details in the issue. But yeah, for some reason, it's not navigable by keyboard. Other than that, it looks fine. Try a lot. Anyone else? If not, I'll make space for Tomas. Probably some.
I suggest to take a little break and we will continue in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Jo, já jsem psal vlastně naložit já a písovi se nějak moc nechtělo. Jo. Byl teďka povýšený, říkal, že na vyšší
a tady ta obvykle se celkem jako rozpadá. Potom když jsem vlastně
věřím, tak mám připovědu jsem já už jsem se bavil se na co jsme volali, a on se chodil se na ně, protože by hlavně předělávali by. Jsi na nich cokoliv říká, a dám, právě říkal, že to už má. A teď Vlastně spolupracujeme. Přišli o vlastně problémy.
Hello, hello. We are going to continue with another talk, so guys, please come closer and we will start.
Okay, we'll wait a couple of seconds. All right then. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tomas Mlynaric. I currently work as an Android developer relation engineer at Google. And today I would like to talk a little bit about Dagger and a little bit about sometimes misbehaving Dagger, and that we want to behave it well, and for that we need to actually lock it in Gradle modules sometimes. Whenever I refer to module today, it's going to be probably Dagger module, not Gradle module, unless I specify otherwise. So, Dagger. We'll be talking about Dagger, and mostly I'll be talking about plain vanilla Dagger, not about Hilt, but there will be a reference about Hilt as well. First, I would like to start with a couple of questions. How many of you use Hilt in your projects applications? Could you raise your hand? Two-ish. How many of you use Dagger? Something else? Coin? Okay. How many of you would not raise a hand if I asked anything? Okay. Depending, and yeah, one more question. How many of you don't use any DI at all? Okay, there's one. So actually I asked because depending on how you answered the questions, the talk may be either a little bit harder for you. It requires a little bit of Dagger knowledge and DI knowledge. I'm not mentioning that. If you need that, there's plenty of resources in either developer Android documentation or newly created math skills series about DI, Dagger, and Hilt. But for today, I would like you to imagine a situation, an application which you built. It's going to be awesome, definitely. But the application, you need to start with something. And you usually have your application, you usually have a Gradle module called app, root, mobile, imagine your situation. And then you want to, or you would like to modularize your application, so you have some feature module. I'm not referring to a dynamic feature module, but like a regular Gradle module as usual. If you follow more layer-based architecture, you can imagine some domain data, something like that. Use your imagination for that. And then in your feature module, you want to use some libraries, some library manager. It could be analytics, Firebase, Exoplayer, whatever. Again, imagine it does something as it says. So again, what you usually do, you add implementation to your Gradle script and just add it to your feature module so that it's actually nicely encapsulated in the part of your application, and the rest of the application doesn't know anything about this particular library manager, which is fine. That's why we want to do that. Okay, so if we talk about Dagger, we typically have with plain Dagger, vanilla Dagger, we have something like app component. I don't specify here the whole setup, but you can imagine, you would set it in your app on create or something like that. You have the annotated component and etc. And then in your feature module, you would have some kind of, let's name it feature repository or feature manager or whatever. And there you actually want to grab the library manager because you want to encapsulate it so that you don't pollute your whole code base with the external library. So you grab it, you have the constructor annotated with inject as works with Dagger, and you call do something so that it does something. And then you compile. I'll skip the time a little bit because, I'm sure it sometimes takes longer to build, but I'll skip it. And after build happens, it actually fails with an error that library manager cannot be provided without an inject annotated constructor or provides annotated method. So you're like, oh yeah, of course, it's a third-party library, it doesn't know anything about Dagger, right? So what you need to do, you need to create a module, let's call it feature module, and then you need to provide the library manager. So far, we don't do anything special, anything crazy. If it was, for example, some Firebase library, it usually comes as a singleton, so you'd have get instance here with some setup, etc. Okay, and then one thing, you need to actually add the module to your app component, right? So that your Dagger compiler actually knows where it can take the dependencies from. All right, now it looks proper. We can try to compile again. Again, I'll skip the time. And it fails again. It fails with an error that Dagger app component cannot access library manager. So here you're like, what's Dagger app component? Where does it come from? You can start feeling like, what's happening? I don't know anything about Dagger app component. So what's the actual problem? Let's see it graphically. So this is the same representation as before. On the left side, you have the app component. On the right side, there's the library manager. So then you would have your feature repository. So your app component actually touches the feature repository, and this touches and uses the library manager. Then you have your feature module. It provides your library manager, so app component touches this as well. But here, what Dagger actually does when it compiles is that based on the annotation component, it will generate new class called Dagger XYZ based on how you call your component. So in our case, Dagger component. And what it has, it's actually inside of it, there's a field provider of type library manager. And this is actually the problem. So we have our application module. Inside of the generated code in application module, there's a field with library manager. But our application module doesn't see the library manager as it's like a one more dependency, and it actually cannot touch it. It's the same as if you would like to touch library manager in your application module. You can't. You simply, the Gradle doesn't allow it. So this is a problem. And so we need to, whenever we have something with Dagger, we need to, the key concept is that Dagger always connects all the generated code in components. It doesn't do it in modules. It's always does it in components. Okay, so we have a problem, but how we fix it, right? Okay, simple solution would be we can relax the implementation to API, and we're done, right? We basically relax that our app module can see to the third-party library. But if we do that, this is not proper, right? If we do that, then we basically, our first task to encapsulate the third-party library, we basically broke it, because now when we have API in Gradle, our app module can see everything which is in the library. So it's not just the library manager as we want it, it's everything. It could be constants, other classes, everything. And so if we wanted to provide just the library manager and we don't want to use outside anything else, now our app module can actually see it. So just for curiosity, has any one of you did that in your projects sometimes ago or something? Yeah, so it happened even for us. So we can fix it. I'll show you later. But before we actually fix it, I'll add another problem so that we have two birds to solve. So one more thing to do is we may want to do in our applications is that we want to encapsulate some of the actual code in the module itself. So Java had or has visibility modifiers like private, protected, package local, public, and Kotlin actually added a different visibility modifier, which is internal. And the internal, what it does and what it helps with is that it actually helps the compilation, because whenever something is internal and you actually change the implementation of something which is internal, the API of the module doesn't have to change, and therefore other modules in your project don't need to recompile because of this change. So actually the change is like encapsulated in the module itself. So internal is actually helpful. And also you cannot touch it outside of the module. So whenever you have something like implementation detail you want to hide from other users from your script, you can actually do that with internal. So what would it mean in our case if we wanted to do that actually with the feature repository, let's say? All right, so for example, we can do something like that we can have feature repository interface, which actually has the method do something. And then we can have the internal class, which is implementation of this interface. It will have the inject. I don't have the library manager here in the constructor, and the do something is omitted, but you can imagine that there's the code, or there's some other code which you actually want to hide as an implementation detail from other modules. Okay, and then what you actually need to do, because Dagger out of the box doesn't know what's the implementation of an interface. So whenever you want to inject the interface, it doesn't know, like, it could be anything. You could implement it manually, and it doesn't know it. So for that, you need to tell it what's the actual implementation. You could theoretically use provides. You could provide and instantiate the implementation and return type as its interface. But binds, there's a different annotation, which is actually more performant, because whenever Dagger sees that it needs the interface, wherever in any constructor, it basically will just put there the implementation, because it knows that you can substitute the implementation for the interface. Okay, so we have the feature module, which with binds method, and again, you have it in your app component, and you compile, and now you can actually predict that it's going to fail. And it's going to fail with something like public function exposes its internal parameter type feature repository info. So again, graphically, what's happening is that this is what we had. We had the app component feature repository library manager. We switched the feature repository to the interface, just plain interface, which is public. And then we have the internal implementation. And then we have the module which binds the implementation to the public interface. And again, app component will use the feature module. Yeah. And here, as we can see, that actually the one method, the binds feature repository method, uses the internal parameter, and that's something which Dagger doesn't allow, because you wouldn't be able basically to use it outside of the module. It would be the same as you would have something private and you would like to use it. You don't even have to compile this code to actually see the error. The IntelliSense of Android Studio will tell you that this is a no-no, you cannot do that. Okay, so now we have two problems. So how do we fix them? And I mean, really fix them, not like something that we would use API instead of implementation. For that to fix it, what we need to do and what we need to have is actually multiple components. We cannot have just one component. Basically, we need to have component in each module we want to encapsulate stuff in. So this is our example. Let's forget about the library part, put it aside because we don't change anything there. So multiple components means that we create something like, let's call it feature component, data component, domain component, you name it. And then what you need to actually do is that you take the feature module from the app component and put it into the feature component so that it's in the same module as you have the implementation, it's in the same module as you have basically the feature repository and everything in it. And then your app component actually needs to know where can it take stuff from, where can it take the feature repository from. So you make your app component dependent on the feature component. And therefore, if you do that, when you create the app component, you'll need to provide first the feature component so that it can take and inject stuff from. And there's one more thing. Whenever you want to provide stuff outside of a component, you need to specifically mention what you want to provide outside. So in our case, we need to just say that our feature component can provide outside of it the feature repository as we had before. You can kind of see it like public visibility modifier for Dagger or something like that outside of the component. So basically this is something to encapsulate stuff in components. When you want it outside, you need to manually specify it. And when we see it graphically, this is something we had before. So what we do now is that we put aside the stuff, we create the feature component, and then whenever Dagger generates the code, as I said, it connects the stuff in components always. So it will generate Dagger feature component, and it's going to have the provider of library manager in it. And therefore, the app component doesn't know anything about library manager. So with this, you actually can compile your code. And then when you have the dependency from app component to feature component, so this is basically how it looks like. And therefore, you have everything in the module. Gradle is happy, Dagger is happy, you are happy, users are happy, everyone's happy. But there's always but, right? What we usually have in our applications is that we have scopes. Scoped components, right? Our app component usually is something like singleton, because we want to provide stuff which can be longer than and it will not be recreated with every provide, but we want to have it for something long time. Well, I mean, for the long application, for the whole application process. So with scopes, we could try, all right, we will add scope to our app component. It's going to be singleton or some other scope as you have. And we will add some feature scope or other scope for our feature component, right? And that should be it, right? But we compile and there's an error. And there is something kind of weird that this singleton components cannot depend on scoped components, feature scope. And at least for me, for quite a long time, it was like kind of dead end. Like we would need to have something like scope inheritance, but unfortunately, this doesn't exist. So you cannot just inherit singleton to be something less. Technically, you could, but you would need to use subcomponents for that. But if you would try to have subcomponent with different scope, then subcomponent is actually generated within the class of its parent component, which in our case means that if we had sub-feature subcomponent in the module, the feature module, it would still be generated in the app module. So it would be basically in the beginning that in app module there would be dependency on library manager and it cannot touch it. So we cannot use subcomponents. We don't have any scope inheritance, so it kind of feels like a dead end. But we can go around it a little bit. I call it, so we can contract the interface. We can use contract interface and basically abstract our components to do magic. How we do that? So whenever there's a component with scope or with annotation component, Dagger actually validates the dependency between each other and checks the scopes. And we can actually trick Dagger a bit not to do that. So this is again our example. We'll put the app part aside. What we need to do is that we'll create some contract, like feature component contract, let's call it, and we'll put the feature repository field to it. And then we will let our feature component to actually implement the contract. So from the code perspective, nothing much changed because the feature component still has the field since inheritance works. But we have this kind of step to actually trick Dagger. In our app component, we will not use the feature component itself, but we will use the contract. And so Dagger, the annotation component is basically just an annotation to generate code. And since we have it, but we don't use the dependency for it, basically for dependency you can have anything. It doesn't have to be component. It can be plain interface, and Dagger will basically, if it has the type it needs in the dependency, it will just take it from it. So basically we can skip the validation of scope this way, that we will put some simple interface there and our actual component implements it and the actual generated code implements it, so it works. So let's see it graphically to actually more understand how it works. So this is what we had again before. We will put the feature component a bit down and we create the contract. And what we did is actually we will take the feature repository out of the component, put it into the contract, and we use inheritance. So basically from the code generation perspective, it's basically the same. Dagger capped annotation processor will the component in the annotation. It will create Dagger feature component as it was before. It's just that our contract now has the field, but since the inheritance will basically have the field, it will still generate the provide of library manager and feature repository. It basically works the same, but we created another like abstraction of on top of our component. And then instead of actually using the feature component, we will tell the dependencies to the contract. and this basically skips the validation of the scope, but at the same time, from the perspective of the actual code, it works the same. You may think that this is kind of hack. Maybe it's a feature, who knows, right? A couple of years ago, Ron Shapiro, one of the contributors of Dagger, like mentioned that this is something either works as intended or is basically impossible to detect. And that's true because, as I said, from the code perspective, it's basically still the same thing. It's just that we kind of trick annotation processor to skip one step. So from my perspective, it's kind of a trade-off. Because if you want to, improve build time, improve encapsulation, this is kind of a way how you can achieve that. But at the same time, there are some issues. One of the issues is that since you skip scope validation, you could basically end up having two components annotated with singleton, for example, which is still fine. But if you have one class and you provide them in both components, you can actually end up with two instances of the class, right? Because it will be one singleton in one component and singleton in other. So there's a possibility to make mistakes. And at the same time, it's kind of verbose because you need to specify all of the stuff you want to provide outside of the module to the app module. But at the same time, this is something which works well with many modules, so you can like scale it and it will still work. You just need to remember that you can, when you have something like a singleton or something, you need to be careful not to have multiple instances of it. And since all of this is kind of like a lot of steps and a lot of stuff, how about Hilt? So just to briefly what Hilt is, you probably all know what Hilt is, but just to mention, like Hilt actually uses Dagger. Dagger is basically abstraction and code generation for dependency injection and for providing stuff. And Hilt is actually abstraction and code generation for Dagger. So Hilt basically just generates Dagger code, and then Dagger generates the real code, which actually works. So Dagger is just Hilt isn't just an abstraction over Dagger. With Hilt, you never create your custom components. So it has predefined components, something like singleton component, activity component, etc. So the way of thinking with Hilt is actually a little bit different, like the other way around. It's not that you have components and you include stuff, it's that you have stuff and you install them in the components. And when you install them, actually the Gradle plugin and code generation, it goes over the code base and finds the install in annotations and collect them and actually create the code for Dagger. It basically creates the components and includes the stuff as you would do manually. Hilt would have the same problem, actually. It would have the same issue with the visibility to the third-party library. But since version 2.37, which is some time ago, they added a flag. I'm not sure, it may be enabled by default, but if not, then you add this configuration to your Gradle, enable aggregating task. And what it does is basically that it will, again, it collects all the install things, but then it actually provides the class path of the actual implementation when compiling. So with this, you can still have your implementation. You don't have to have API in your Gradle script, but at the same time, it'll work. So with Hilt, you don't have to have the verbosity, and you can still have the compile time awesomeness. And so yeah, so Hilt will allow you to do all the things I just mentioned manually with basically just this flag enabled in Gradle. I want to just mention one thing. Hilt, because some time ago, Hilt didn't work well with dynamic feature modules. It actually can work, but there's one thing. Since with dynamic feature module, the dependency is kind of like the other way around. It's not application visible on feature, dynamic feature, but the dynamic feature sees the application. There's no way you can install in stuff in the module itself. So when you have dynamic feature module, what you can do is you can still have your plain Dagger component, and this plain Dagger component would be dependent on your singleton component, basically the stuff you have in the rest of the application. So with this, you can have like both of the worlds. You can still have the hilt in whenever you have the regular modules, but with the dynamic feature module, you would have basically plain Dagger, and it can communicate with each other well. And with that being said, I thank you for listening. Hopefully you learned something new. And if anyone have any question. If there are no questions, then we can mingle. All right, maybe I'll have a question based on what you just heard. Would you maybe consider hilt instead of Dagger? Like very first sense. It's an option. It's optional. You don't have to. Thank you then.
Thank you so much, and that's it. So thank you for your attention, and now we can continue with party and beers and pizza. So enjoy the evening. Thank you.